She wore a camera, sunscreen, and the easy smile of someone just passing through. The other hikers saw her as a tourist, another quiet traveler soaking in the mountain view. But when the trail vanished in a sudden landslide and panic set in, it was her voice that cut through the chaos, calm, commanding, precise. She reached for her bag, not for water, but a folded satellite map, a radio, and a penlight coded for Morse. That's when they realized. She wasn't here to sightsee. She was trained to save lives. The trail was marked with faded paint and memory, cut through the forested edge of the northern Pyrenees. It wasn't exactly dangerous, but it demanded respect. Twisting footpaths, sudden drops, temperamental weather that could shift from golden sun to dense fog in 20 minutes. The kind of place that rewarded quiet discipline and punished arrogance, which is why most hikers came prepared. But that morning, the group assembled at the trailhead looked more like tourists than trekkers. College students on break, middle-aged couples with GoPros, a few solo hikers, earbuds in, walking sticks out, optimism high. She arrived alone, wearing a plain gray jacket, neutral hiking pants, a wide brim hat. Her backpack wasn't trendy, it was military issue, well-worn but meticulously maintained. No brand names, no flags, just a small stitched patch on the strap, S. Miller. She nodded politely to the trail marshal, handed over her permit. No questions, no drama. The others barely noticed her, just another quiet woman in her early 30s. American by her accent, maybe a teacher or a writer, the kind of person who slips through the background of a group neither annoying nor interesting. The kind people forget until they need remembering. Her name, as listed on the sign-in log, was Sarah Miller. The group was a mixed 12 people in total. Nationalities varied: German, French, Spanish, American, British. The only common language was English, spoken unevenly among them, with occasional frustrations over phrasing. A local guide, Etienne, led the way, young, energetic, and only mildly overconfident. He explained the route quickly, a half-day loop, toward the ridge, then back along a lower path that skirted the edge of the forest. "Don't wander off," he said. "The cliffs can be deceptive, and the lower ravine, don't go near it. Unstable after last month's rains." Sarah nodded. Others took selfies as they walked. Sarah kept to the rear, not lagging, not aloof, just observing, noticing the weak ankles, the loose shoelaces, the oversized packs that would fatigue their carriers by mid-afternoon. She adjusted her own pace accordingly, efficient, quiet, calm. By midday, the group had thinned into smaller clumps. One couple argued over map directions. A student tried to connect a GPS with no signal. Someone else dropped a granola bar, drawing the attention of a mountain fox that disappeared into the scrub like a shadow. The trail rose, then narrowed. The path hugged a slope where shale had loosened from recent storms. Etienne motioned for the group to pause, assessing wind and footing. That's when the tremor hit. It wasn't dramatic, just a low, grating vibration, like the earth clearing its throat. But it was enough. The rock gave way. One hiker slipped, screamed. The sound triggered panic. Someone lunged to help, stepped wrong, and knocked another person sideways. Etienne yelled, but his voice was swallowed by the sound of rock shearing off the slope. A thin ribbon of the trail crumbled, vanished, leaving 5 people stranded on a narrowing ledge, unable to retreat. Screams, shouting, a scramble to find footing. Then one voice cut through. Everyone stopped moving. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't panicked. It was Sarah. She stepped forward, eyes locked on the unstable slope. Her tone dropped lower, measured, crisp. "Do not shift your weight. Stay exactly where you are." People froze, not because they understood why, but because they understood how she said it. Etienne looked at her, stunned. "Who?" Sarah turned to him. "We have 30 minutes max before that shale gives. Where's your radio?" He blinked. It's in my pack. "Get it. But the signal, we're not relying on signal. We're relying on triangulation." She unzipped her own pack. Inside, a laminated topographic map, compass, signal mirror, compact radio, flare pen, and a small field medical kit. Etienne took a step back. "Who are you?" She looked up, not unkindly. "Someone who's done this before. 10. Years earlier, Sarah had served as a wilderness operations liaison for a NATO Joint Rescue Unit. Her specialty, rapid response and high-altitude terrain. She'd coordinated extraction missions, trained in avalanche response, and led civilian evacuations after a seismic event in Turkey. But she never mentioned that to anyone here. After her discharge, she'd chosen a different life, quiet, civilian, mobile. She didn't chase medals, she chased peace. But peace didn't mean forgetting what to do when the earth moved under your boots. As the group huddled into a more stable zone, Sarah took charge not with force, but with precision. She repositioned, weight loads, reassigned water distribution, instructed a panicked woman in Spanish to sit and elevate her foot twisted, likely sprained. Etienne, to his credit, followed her lead. No one called her ma'am. No one asked if she had the authority. They just listened, and slowly order returned. Sarah marked their coordinates on the topo map, then began issuing instructions. Signal mirror flashes every 15 seconds. One flare at 15 minutes. Radio loop transmission every 5. The stakes were simple. If they weren't found by sunset, the night temperatures would drop below freezing. 2 hikers didn't have gear for that. One had mild shock. One was bleeding from a cut on their thigh. They didn't need a miracle. They needed a professional. And without ever declaring herself one, Sarah had become exactly that. Back on the ledge, one of the stranded hikers, the same woman who'd laughed earlier about how the trail wasn't that hard, now stared at Sarah with quiet awe. "Why didn't you say anything before?" Sarah, reloading the flare pen, replied without pause, "Because I hoped I wouldn't have to." By early afternoon, the sky had begun to turn. Thin clouds gathered along the ridge, their edges sharp and fast-moving signs of an incoming pressure drop. The hikers sat in the safest pocket Sarah could find, a sheltered ledge ringed by scrub and slate, elevated just enough to avoid runoff but low enough to shield from gusts. Sarah paced the perimeter. Etienne followed, not out of suspicion but confusion. "You're not just a hiker," he said. Sarah scanned the slope, then looked over her shoulder. "No. You military? Used to be. Rescue? Something like that." He hesitated, then said, "You're better trained than me." She turned. "It's not about better, it's about prepared." Etienne dropped his eyes. "I was supposed to lead. You saved us." She didn't answer, because it wasn't about credit. It was about people who still needed to make it home. But back at the base lodge far below the slope, something else was happening. The emergency signal had been picked up, but not by official rescue services. A park administrator named Bruno Keller, known for his rigid adherence to hierarchy, had intercepted the first flare report and radioed back a terse order, await ranger assessment. Before engaging full response, Bruno didn't know Sarah, didn't recognize the ID code she used, and when her voice came through on the emergency frequency measured, calm, professional, he immediately flagged it for unauthorized civilian interference. "She's not on the official list of guides," he said to his assistant. "If this goes wrong, it's on us. But sir, she's clearly trained. She's not credentialed. Not in our system. If something happens under her command, we're liable." So he stalled. He logged the alert but delayed the dispatch. And on the mountain, time was losing patience. Mid-roll monetization marker. Number 1 would naturally fall here just as Sarah's authority is challenged from afar. And the audience realizes that despite her competence, bureaucracy may jeopardize the rescue. It creates moral tension and holds attention before the backstory. Reveal. Back at the ledge, the hikers were starting to feel the cold. One woman, shivering, whispered to Sarah, "Why aren't the helicopters here yet?" Sarah checked the time, calculated the gap. Something was off. The flare would have been visible. From the ranger tower, they should have scrambled ground teams by now. Etienne frowned. "You think they're waiting?" Sarah nodded. "Or stalling. For what?" "For protocol." He cursed softly in French. One of the hikers, a man in his late 50s named Dieter German, ex-professor, stepped forward. "You're saying we've been marked down as civilians without authority?" "Yes," Sarah said. "And because I didn't go through official park channels, my report may not be taken seriously." "But your tone," he said, "your knowledge, any rational person would know." "They don't want knowledge," she said quietly. They want position. Silence followed. Then Dieter said, "That's absurd. It's common." She replied. Another hiker, a younger Spanish man, asked, "So what do we do?" Sarah knelt beside him and pulled out a second flare. "We make ourselves undeniable." She gave instructions again: mirror flashes, signal rotations, reflective strips, tied to poles. The goal wasn't panic, it was clarity. "We don't act like victims," she told them. "We act like a team." And they did. They followed her. Because in the absence of official recognition, trust had become the only authority that mattered. Meanwhile, Bruno at the base lodge was crafting a narrative. He preemptively notified the press. Untrained tourist attempts rescue. Emergency. Teams en route to stabilize situation. He positioned himself as the overseer of the response. The hikers' lives, still very much at risk, had become a liability he was managing. Mid-roll monetization marker number 2 can be placed here before the emotional reveal of Sarah's backstory and the unraveling of Bruno's false narrative. Viewer interest is held through a curiosity gap. Who is she really? And will they make it? In time, at dusk, the temperature dropped sharply. A mist rolled in from the north slope, cutting visibility, making the hikers feel smaller, more exposed. A young girl began to cry quietly. Sarah placed her jacket around the girl's shoulders and sat beside her. Dieter approached again. This time, he carried something, a notebook. "I wrote down what I saw," he said. "What you did. If we make it out, I'll testify. If we don't..." Sarah took the notebook gently. "Thank you," she said. Dieter added, "They wouldn't have lasted an hour without you." Sarah's eyes didn't water, but they did soften. She had led missions before, but never like this. Never where her past was invisible and her present depended on strangers, believing in her without credentials. Then on the ridge above them came the first beam of light. A helicopter rotor, a searchlight piercing the mist. Sarah stood, waved her mirror. Someone saw her. The radio crackled. Team Alpha visual confirmed. Hold position. She exhaled, not in triumph, in relief. Not for herself, but for them. The extraction took time. Medical checks, harness lifts, carefully managed descents. Etienne pulled Sarah aside. "They tried to discredit you," he said. "At base camp, I expected that. But people saw, heard. The rescue team, they knew your codes. I trained them," she said, almost as an afterthought. He blinked. "You? What?" "I helped write the protocols after the 2012 avalanche season." Etienne looked at her, this time not as a subordinate or a tourist, but as something else entirely. "Why come here alone?" Sarah looked out across the valley, the lights. "The people safe now. Sometimes I need to remember why I trained." Without the noise, without the medals, he nodded, said nothing more, because it was already enough. Back at the base, Bruno was waiting. He tried to intercept Sarah. She walked past him. One of the rangers who'd recognized her call sign from training manuals saluted as she passed. Bruno didn't speak again, but he filed a report, and that report became a footnote in a larger investigation into rescue delays, protocol abuse, and the importance of recognizing skill before disaster strikes. The report reached the Regional Emergency Board 2 days later. Filed by Ranger Levesque, the team lead who had overseen the mountain rescue. It included coordinates, photographs, eyewitness accounts, and a final recommendation that stood out in bold. The civilian, identified as Sarah Miller, demonstrated superior field leadership under pressure. Her conduct aligns with NATO standard wilderness extraction protocol. Recommend formal recognition and inquiry into administrative delays. Attached was a note, handwritten, clipped to the last page. She saved them, all of them, not because it was her job, but because it was who she is. By the end of the week, the story had moved beyond lodge whispers. The local paper ran the headline, "Tourist turned leader, the woman who saved 12 lives." The article went viral, at first for the irony, a quiet, unknown traveler leading a rescue when the professionals hesitated, but then for something else. The realization that real leadership often walks in quietly, without uniform or title, and still gets the job done. The online comments echoed a deeper truth. Why do we only respect people after they prove they were always qualified? She didn't raise her voice once. That's power. Makes you wonder how many Sarahs go unseen every day. Sarah read none of it. She was already gone. She had left the base the morning after the rescue after making sure every hiker was accounted for. After declining interviews. After placing a simple typed note in the hands of the junior medic who had first offered her a water bottle. Don't remember my name. Just remember that sometimes when no one else moves, you are enough. She boarded a train before sunrise, window seat, backpack at her side. Her patch S. Miller, still stitched, still worn. But the story didn't. And there, 3 weeks later, she received a letter. It had no return address. Just a crisp envelope marked with an old NATO insignia. Inside was a simple line typed in courier font. You're still listed in the living files. We never forgot you. And beneath that, a second line handwritten. We need instructors. You choose when. Sarah folded the letter slowly. She didn't smile, but her breath softened, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself consider returning not to the spotlight, but to the work, quietly, precisely, where it mattered. Meanwhile, in the Pyrenees, things were shifting. Etienne, the young guide who had once led with charm and little caution, was now enrolled in a full wilderness response certification program. He mentioned Sarah in every class essay. Dieter, the German professor, published a short piece in a European ethics journal titled, When Authority Fails, the morality of listening to the quietest person in the room. He closed it with the line, true leadership is not volume. It is velocity when everything else stands still. And Bruno was reassigned. His attempt to shift blame backfired when multiple witness statements contradicted his report. The investigation concluded he had delayed emergency response due to protocol rigidity, a phrase that would follow him to every interview afterward. No one celebrated his fall, but everyone understood it, because when power defends its own silence over human life, it has already failed. In the months that followed, more hikers returned to the same ridge. The trail was repaired, the slope reinforced, the signage updated to include new emergency procedures, many of which were quietly based on the handwritten notes Sarah had left behind. A small plaque was installed at the lookout point. It read, "To the unseen protector, your silence led us home." It didn't include her name. At Sarah's request, the second emotional twist came a season later. Etienne received a package in the mail. No letter, just a book. Inside, a field operations manual for international wilderness rescue, 200 pages, dated 3 years prior, issued by NATO. In the author line, Miller, S. Operations Draft Lead. Etienne closed the book gently. He placed it on his shelf not as a trophy, but as a compass. Final public resolution came when one of the rescued hikers, a girl named Clara, who had been traveling solo, applied to join the civil protection unit in her home city in Spain. When asked why she wanted to serve, she said, "Because I know what it feels like to be saved by someone who never asked to be believed. And I want to be that someone for someone else." She got in. So who was Sarah Miller? Not a tourist, not just a former soldier. She was a mirror. She revealed people to themselves. She gave no speeches, wore no medals, and kept moving when others froze, not to be seen, but to serve. And maybe, in a world too full of noise and performance, that was the rarest kind of power. The trail never looked the same again. Etienne returned to it months later, not as a guide, but as a witness. The ridge had been reinforced, the unstable slope now bolted and shored with fresh stone and steel. A new sign had been posted near the ledge, not flashy, just a weatherproof plaque mounted on a cedar stake, in honor of the unknown rescuer who turned fear into focus and strangers into survivors. Etienne stood silently before it, hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. The wind swept the grass in waves, and the clouds hung low but soft, like breath held just long enough to matter. He remembered the moment clearly, not just the sound of rocks falling or the tremble in the air, but the calm in Sarah's voice, the stillness she carried, the precision of her movements. He had called himself a guide, but she had been the one who led, and yet she had asked for no recognition, no photo, no name, only one request: passed along by the medic at base camp. Don't build this story around me. Build it around what was learned. And they had. Since that day, training had changed. Local hiking authorities began integrating scenario simulations into their programs. Led not by administrators, but by field-tested personnel, they emphasized listening before assuming, responding over commanding, not judging authority by visibility. They called it Protocol S, named unofficially, of course, after Sarah Miller. It stood for situational awareness, silence, and service. In time, it became more than procedure. It became a philosophy. Meanwhile, in a quieter part of Europe, Sarah had settled again. A different region, a smaller town. She lived near mountains still, but not ones that drew tourists. These were humbler ridges, marked by shepherd paths and forgotten markers. She spent her mornings walking alone, sometimes with a map, sometimes without. She didn't need routes. She read terrain like a familiar face. The NATO letter still sat on her shelf unopened now for months. She hadn't replied, and they hadn't pressed. They knew her type. When she was ready, she would come. But she hadn't closed the door. Not entirely. Instead, she began mentoring quietly. A small flight school nearby had accepted her as a guest instructor. Unaware of her history at first, she taught under the name S. Miller, signed her notes with simple diagrams, and listened more than she spoke. It wasn't until one of her students stumbled upon her name in a military training database that her story resurfaced again. The student asked, "Is it true you once ran a mountain rescue as a civilian?" Sarah replied, "It's true I didn't walk away." The student paused. Why not? She thought for a moment, then answered, "Because walking away is for people who don't know what they're capable of." I did. The student wrote that on the inside cover of their field journal. It passed from one trainee to the next, quietly, like a rumor with roots. Elsewhere, the people she had rescued carried her story forward in their own ways. Dieter returned to teaching, but now included case studies not just of ethical failures, but of ethical interruptions when ordinary individuals stepped beyond their given roles to do what was right. He used Sarah as a case study not by name, but by principle. His students left class with more questions than answers. That was his intention. Clara, the young Spanish hiker, graduated her civil protection program with honors. On her final exam, she cited the day on the ridge not as trauma but transformation. "We didn't survive because someone told us what to do. We survived because someone knew and didn't wait to be asked." That line was shared in every graduating class after her. And Etienne still guided hikers, but differently now. He stopped treating the trail like a stage. He started preparing each group with more than just routes. He taught them about situational awareness, group dynamics, and decision-making in panic. He told them that leadership could wear any face, quiet, sunburnt, dusted in sweat and humility. And he kept one photo in his locker, a group shot from the rescue day, hikers tired but safe, standing at dusk with mist curling behind them. In the center, barely noticeable unless you looked closely, Sarah, her face half turned, her eyes scanning the horizon. She wasn't posing. She was still working, still watching. One evening, Etienne received a letter, no return address, no signature, just a folded piece of paper and a pressed leaf pine, still fragrant despite the postmark. The letter read, "I saw the new plaque. Thank you for listening. That's all I ever needed." He placed it inside a journal marked Protocol. Closed the book and exhaled. She was still out there, not waiting for thanks, just making sure someone else could take the next step forward with a little more clarity and a lot more courage. Some leaders don't ask for a spotlight. They don't wear rank on their shoulders or demand recognition. They simply act calmly, quietly, and with conviction when the moment calls. Sarah never introduced herself as a rescuer. She didn't need to. Her presence, her skill, and her choices told the truth that others tried to overlook. In a world that often mistakes silence for absence, her story is a reminder. Strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it listens first, then moves. If this story moved you, leave a comment with a single word that honors Sarah's quiet courage, something like word or Stark, and share this with someone who leads not by demanding attention, but by showing up when it matters most, because sometimes The ones we overlook are the ones who save us. Thank you for watching A Quiet Truth, Finally Told.